Thanks for joining us for our webinar on Building Awareness and Will, a Canada-wide strategy for belonging. We are so excited to spend this time together with you and share some reflections on what this year of mobilization, learning, and unlearning has looked like. I'd also like to start by acknowledging the lands where I'm joining from. I am Jorge. I'm stewarding the Communities Building Belonging movement at the Tamarack Institute, and I am joining you from the lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka people, and in a city that is known as Montreal, also known as Tiohtià:ke. And I am very grateful for the connections that I have to these lands and the relationships that have continued to nurture and strengthen the sense of belonging over time, something that is not taken, but also something that actually requires intentionality and care. I also want to acknowledge that that those who came here as settlers, as migrants, either in this generation or in generations past, and those who came here involuntarily, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. We want to pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent, and this acknowledgement is really important because it's part of our commitment at Tamarack to dismantle systemic anti-Black racism, which, as we all know, has resulted in many inequities for communities over time. So we have one quick check-in question for you, and you may choose to answer now. You may choose to pause and just answer at another time. And the question is, what is one gift you bring to build belonging in your community? What is one gift you bring to build belonging in your community? And before we start our conversation, I'd like to share a personal story on belonging. Those of you who know me might have heard that I came to Canada as an international student. I came here over 12 years ago. For those of you who don't know me, I was born in Mexico, and I came to Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, to pursue my master's studies in urban planning. It was a deep learning experience, but it was also an experience in which I never really felt like I belonged to a predominantly Anglophone white space, such as McGill University. It wasn't an easy journey for me. And after school, it was not easy to find employment opportunities. So I spent a couple of months being unhoused. I lived in different places, and I also spent that time being unhoused as a result of domestic violence. So during that time, what really made me move forward and carry on was the relationships. Those individuals who I met outside school, and the few ones that saw me, that noticed me in the classrooms, and that invited me to their homes. For a couple of months, I didn't have a fixed address, and it was quite scary and concerning. I am really grateful to those communities, those relationships that helped me move forward. And over time, I have learned that this is not an isolated story. This is the story of many international students, those of us who eventually become permanent residents and citizens, those of us who may have very volatile contexts in which we don't always have the support, whether it's financial or relational, and those of us who are most directly impacted by any kinds of violence. So I am reflecting a lot on that moment because it really helped me understand the value of belonging and the value of connections. But it also reminded me that belonging is not something granted. So if I look at 2025, we hear stories on international students being blamed for the housing crisis. But I'm also reminding myself that I didn't have a house at that moment. How could I have taken someone else's house? So our sense of belonging is something that is not granted. It's something that requires work, that requires care, and requires a lot of intention. And I thought of sharing this story with you to ground you on where I'm coming from. I have other stories of belonging, but I chose this one just given the magnitude of the crisis we're facing, the crisis of division and the crisis of polarization. And also I'm sharing this story with hope and optimism, recognizing that there's more than we can do. And there are bright stories that we're hearing from communities, which is why we're joining you today, to share those stories, to share those lessons learned, and what we can do moving forward in building this movement that we're calling the Strategy for Belonging. That being said, I am really excited, really grateful for the speakers that are joining us today. We have Heather Keam, our Consulting Director of Asset-Based Community Development at the Tamarack Institute. Justin Williams, our Associate Director of Public Policy and Government Relations in the Tamarack Institute, and Njoki Mbũrũ, Strategic Storyteller, Facilitator, and Futurist. These three wonderful individuals have, these three individuals plus myself, we have been working closely to shape and help nurture the conversations on a strategy for belonging. And you can learn more about who they are and through their bios on our website. And for now, I'd like to welcome them and just really express my gratitude for their thought leadership, their commitment to this work, their level of care in cultivating relationships. And I'm really thrilled that of the conversation that we're going to be having today and the wisdom that they bring to the space. So we'll start with you, Heather.
Hello, everybody. I have to apologize. I'm getting over a cold, so you've got the frog voice here. I'm so happy to be here today. As a mom of 3 teenage boys, a wife, a sister, and 23 years working in community, sense of belonging is near and dear to my heart. It is so important to me, and I believe that that's what's missing in our society today. Tamarack has always known that community is essential. Since 2016, the formerly known team Deepening Community, we helped networks of members and learners to focus on community and harnessing our local gifts and assets so that people in their neighborhoods can build relationships and connection and become active in their communities. I joined the Deepening Community team in 2018. And we noticed that loneliness and disconnection had been a growing issue in Canada over the past decade, the research that we've collected from 2015 onwards. And then since COVID, Canada has witnessed a concerning surge in loneliness and disconnection. I'm going to actually say around the world. COVID has affected around the world. And then the release of the U.S. Surgeon General report in 2023. And if you haven't seen that or read it, it's a really good report. And it stated that loneliness and disconnection is now the public health issue. This report got a lot of attention in Canada. And I noticed that it started this domino effect of our top-down approach to solutions, which was more programs and more money. And I got talking with our CEO, and I was like, we've got to do something a bit different. If the traditional ways of dealing with issues worked, we wouldn't be in the crisis we are now. We need to work differently. We need to be meeting in the middle, where a bottom-up approach and a top-down meet together. The middle is the sweet spot for change. So this became the focus of our 2023 event, that national event that we had. We have an event every year, and it was called When Community and Municipalities Meet in the Middle. And it was such a great conversation and about how do we work together to meet in the middle. And this really brought the two approaches because they're both really important. And the different ways and ideas and thoughts to be able to meet in the middle. At this event, we launched our new name called Communities Building Belonging. And we believe, and I have lots and lots of discussions about this, but we believe that belonging is the keystone to a lot of the issues we're facing today. If you think about it, mental health, substance abuse, gangs, so on. Belonging can really help eliminate those. And I say that very strongly, eliminate those. If we center belonging and build places where people have a purpose, where we contribute to our communities and we connect to build relationships. We don't need to program community. We need to build community. So communities building belonging is working with networks and groups across Canada to center belonging in their plannings. So it's taken us about 60 years to get to this lonely and disconnected state. Communities building belonging recognizes that we need a belonging strategy that is authentic, that takes its time to understand what is strong in our communities, and that it's owned and built by the communities. So at this event, and for the last 2 years, Communities Building Belonging has launched a call for a national belonging strategy that meets in the middle. How can we build a strategy that's done differently, where we all have a role in building belonging in our communities, which brings us here to today.
Thank you so much, Heather. Really appreciate the context that you're providing on where are we coming from, where are we doing this, and we're also grateful for your thought leadership and your hard work in mobilizing communities over time. You have set really strong, healthy foundations for the work that we're doing on building belonging. And just to let the audience know, we are really hoping that this conversation is a very informal conversation for you to get to know more about who we are, why we're doing this work, where we're coming from, what's happening right now, and where are we going to go from here. So I'll pass it over to Justin, who has very important insights to share on the policy piece of the strategy for belonging. Why is the strategy for belonging so critical for making lasting policy change?
Thank you, Jorge, and thanks everyone for having the opportunity to speak today. Yeah, as Jorge mentioned, I've been asked to provide a little bit about why belonging matters to me, and then some pieces around why government should care about it. So I'll try to be quick about both and really tie that into the piece for the argument for why Canada-wide strategy for belonging that I think needs to go across jurisdictions. So first, I think for me, human beings are social animals. Belonging and social connection are core to how we function. Heather highlighted that we know that when there's that lack of belonging, when there's a higher level of loneliness, or even worse, when people stop feeling lonely, even though they don't have a high level of social connection, it leads to really negative health outcomes. But we also know that it leads to really negative social outcomes because our sense of belonging is tied to how we develop mental models and how we interact with the world. It impacts our trust in others, our trust in institutions, the sense of a positive outlook that we have for the future, and the hope that we can bring forward. We also know that the forces that impact our sense of belonging and our sense of connection are not felt equally across society. Socioeconomic background impacts the way that people interact with the world. It changes the way that they're able to interact with those public spaces, whether they're engaging in recreation, you name it. So we know that that we have to consider those factors when we think about how we address social isolation and belonging broadly. We're seeing fewer people having a sense of belonging and having lower scores for connection, and that's leading to greater polarization, higher likelihood of engaging in conspiracy theories and being susceptible to misinformation, and a lower likelihood for social behavior. At all levels of government, we're seeing a recognition of that symptom, and as Heather pointed out, the symptom. Federally, we have seen mental health programming, the quality of life framework to start to measure this in a better way. At the provincial level, we've seen chief medical officers prepare reports and give ideas for how these could be addressed. Some of them quite positive, I think. And we've seen locally lots of really good work where there's more of addressing not just the symptoms, but some of the areas that work can happen. So we know that there actually is that recognition from government. I think the next step and what we're calling for when we talk about the Canadian-wide strategy for belonging is how do we go the next step for the whole of community and society approaches to increasing our social connection and belonging in ways that addresses the mental health piece, but also recognizes those pieces around social cohesion that's so important, and also addresses that there's inequities in how this challenge needs to be approached. So local governments are, I think, seeing the impacts of our that social disconnection in the most obvious ways. Misinformation is impacting public discourses in a way that's very loudly banging on the municipal door, in a way that they're having to address it and being impacted by it the worst. However, the local, we know, is the best place to do the hard work of improving connection and belonging. And so we know that locally it's easier to rebuild and strengthen connections for individuals. That there's better chances to create trust between diverse people, greater opportunities for broader, diverse leadership to take hold, abilities to address integrated social, economic, and environmental issues together, which again builds trust, and more likely long-term buy-in for individuals who are doing the work. So again, that need to work at the local becomes really crucial. We also know that provincial and federal governments also have a role to play in it. And we know that we do better when we have connected, joined up responses to these pieces, which is why we call for the Canada-wide strategy. The last thing I'll say just really quickly is, similarly to our journey in communities ending poverty, we have a growing experience working with communities, some municipally led, others led by community groups, to develop and implement strategies that deepen relationships and build belonging. We know that there's powerful outcomes that come to light when place-based collaboratives can co-develop, co-own, and implement these kinds of strategies. We also know that local strategies are stronger when they're joined up. So our goal is to reach a point where each jurisdiction in Canada, whether it be the local, the provincial, the territorial, federally, has intersecting strategies that each move the levers that they have in their power to move this forward. I'll pause there.
Thank you, Justin. I really appreciate this, especially this last piece on the end goal. This is something that we are seeing it's emerging stronger this year with the relationships that we're cultivating with municipalities, and we're very grateful for their support, as well as community organizations that are so committed to developing plans and strategies for belonging locally. This is really what we're hoping this year to prioritize our efforts on helping those communities develop those plans, those strategies, test ideas for belonging. And this brings me to the next portion of our conversation, which is with you, Njoki. So we've been working hard on putting together a publication with some insights on what happened in 2024. And our audience can find out about this publication. They will find out about this publication soon. It's almost there. We're almost ready to share it with everyone. And from this publication, what are some takeaways that stay with you, that come to your mind?
First of all, I'm so grateful to be invited back to Tamarack for this webinar, and to listen to the observations from my former colleagues, Heather and Justin, based on their experiences. Writing the publication was quite insightful. I was previously working at Tamarack until January as a manager in the community building belonging team. And it was an honor of mine to have the opportunity to compile what we had been learning alongside so many people, because we did collaborate with a number of people. And the first thing that I want to share is why belonging matters to me, because Jorge started us off with his story, which I want to thank him for. And I want to add with a portion of what I consider to be valuable when I think about belonging. I had to write it down because my mind can be quite in the clouds sometimes. Belonging matters to me because through belonging, our imagination is expanded. Belonging is a touch of liberation, and it is from a liberated place that we give ourselves the permission to play with our imagination. And for myself, I consider imagination to be a technology or freedom. So with that said, what I learned, two key things that I'll share from this publication are on the themes of youth engagement and leadership and mutual aid in connection to belonging. So I'll start with the youth engagement and leadership. What we heard was that youth are often told that they are an essential part of continuing the work of building belonging. There's many times we've perhaps been in conversations where people will say, "You are the future," as youth, which is so empowering, but it is also discouraging and disempowering when that is not backed up by sustainable, long-term, resilient support. So from what we heard, youth are seen as essential in continuing the work of building belonging, but they are, one, not afforded with the resources, the financial and otherwise resources to sustain the work and the initiatives that they have in place. And two, they are not trusted as leaders to steward the resources that they are given, and often then are directed through top-down mechanisms of what they should do with their money or how they should distribute their resources. So youth are asking for, one, funding that is adequate and long-term, and two, training and leadership development, so that it's not always about being seen as mentees, but they also too can be seen as leaders in training and elders in training. And finally, one of the challenges that, not finally, just one more thing. One of the challenges that youth brought up, especially youth that are Indigenous, Black, and racialized immigrants, is that they are tokenized in certain spaces. That is, youth are brought in, maybe consulting about belonging or a policy group that has been convened to create pathways to belonging, and they bring in a youth, but this youth is just brought in for a number as a representative to say we had youth in place without necessarily them having the influence on decision-making capacity that is afforded to everyone else. So what would help is, one, to have allies who are actually willing to back up youth-led work in building belonging through finances, through fundraising, through amplification in their social media platforms, and through policy advocacy. And number two is connected to what Justin said just now, which is that local strategies are stronger when joined up. So another thing that would help youth is to have long-term collaboration with other organizations, perhaps in their place-based work. I'm pretty sure there are long-standing organizations that are able to lend their capacities to youth. Maybe you can be an organization that receives grants on behalf of a youth-led, non-registered collective. And I wonder what that would do. Instead of having the youth to go sign up as a nonprofit and then a charity, what if you were able to just afford your resources and allow youth to have that impact? And another thing that we saw from this report was related to mutual aid. I will actually just go to the definition that I found from Dean Spade's book on mutual aid. He defines mutual aid as a collective coordination to meet each other's needs, usually from an awareness that the systems we have in place are not going to meet them. What we learned from our writing and from hearing in our convenings with people about the importance of belonging and a strategy for belonging is that mutual aid efforts, when well funded, can actually be so much more effective in one, encouraging people to think about belonging, but two, actually putting in place the initiatives and the pillars that are needed to build belonging. Why? Because mutual aid initiatives are emergent, they are responsive to complexity, they are often place-based, and they are community-led, rather than having it being programmatic. That is, a municipal government or an organization decides we're going to have a block party. That's wonderful. And then what? So mutual aid efforts have a way of coming to life or re-emerging from hibernation as needed and are often decentralized. So there isn't necessarily a single point of failure. And that is critical when we're thinking about building belonging. We do not want a single point of failure, not in government, not in our organizations. So mutual aid efforts are decentralized leadership, decentralized power, and are often place-based, which is, as Tamarack often brings up, critical for us when we're thinking about where we want to impact peoples and communities, is how are they connected to their place, and how are they impacting or seeing themselves as leaders in their own place. So building belonging necessitates that we are emergent, that we are adaptable to complexity, that we are decentralized in our leadership and not stuck on programmatic endeavors that often have an end date. Belonging does not have an expiry date. We need to see far, far if we are to actually build belonging. I'll pause there for now.
Thanks for sharing, Njoki. I'm really thinking about this comment that you mentioned on belonging doesn't have not having an expiry date. It reminds me of some of the thinking from our colleagues on the equity and indigenization team at the Tamarack Institute. My colleague Rochelle Ignacio, who shared this really interesting framework of understanding the connections that can have an impact on belonging, and one of them has a dimension of time. So just to what I shared earlier today, belonging is not something that has an end date, is something that requires ongoing effort, ongoing curation, because it's not granted. It's just like trust, belonging is something that is so fragile and can easily go away, and we're seeing it right now in the context we're navigating through. So two insights that I thought of sharing with you from the report include, first, this sense of a perception of risk. And I'm calling it a perception because it's not always real. It's a sense that, especially within institutions and municipalities and community organizations, let's call it, there is a sense of a concern on how much you can reach out to individuals. We're going through such polarized times that it's becoming more and more challenging to develop meaningful engagement practices that are actually going to help us move forward together. So with that in mind, one of the main efforts that we want to prioritize this year is developing more tools and resources to help any change makers, whether they're working for a municipality, for a community center, or for a university, to have those tools so that they can connect with residents in authentic ways, in ways that are mutually respectful and also mutually supportive. Another thing that came from our work is the representation that we have from different sectors and also from different geographies. So I'd like to share with you some visuals that are showcasing who is participating in the strategy for belonging from a geography perspective, but also from a sector perspective. Let me just share my screen now. And as we can see, we have 24% of the individuals who have signed the pledge for a strategy for belonging coming from the nonprofit sector, but we also have governments. 18% of the people who are supporting this strategy, this movement, are coming from the public sector. We also have many healthcare practitioners, and we're grateful that for your engagement and continued support, that continue to reach out, share resources. We have practitioners working on community development, whether it's a local neighborhood organization, a community planner, a newcomer organization. There's a lot of interest from the communities that are working, the individuals that are working closely with communities to address some of the local challenges that communities are facing. There's also representation from universities, from the private sector, funders, primarily community foundations, child, youth, and family support services. And there are other individuals that are coming from other sectors that are less represented, and maybe we can have more of their involvement. One of them is the arts and culture sector. And in terms of geography, well, we have 39% of the pledge supporters coming from Ontario, but we also have, as you can see, representation from Alberta, British Columbia, Quebec, And it's really interesting to see how, especially during the last the last portion of the year, the last half of the year, we noticed that there was an increase on individuals coming from Atlantic Canada, and we have almost every province and territory. I would say it's not showing up in this graphic, but we also have Prince Edward Island, and the only geographic area that is not being covered yet is Nunavut. But other than that, there are different sectors and geographies that are connected to the strategy for belonging, and this is reminding us that we have a Canada-wide movement that has to be mindful and sensitive of the local needs that communities have, and also the different perceptions on risk. But again, a universal sense that we need tools, we need support systems to help us reconnect with each other, to remind us what engagement can look like, and what especially authentic and main engagement, what it can look like and how it can be activated. So with these reflections on what we have found so far, I'd like to pass it over to Heather. So now what, Heather? What are you seeing?
All right. So I just actually, oh, no, I won't go there. So now what? Well, everybody. We need everybody, right? To get involved in this. We need everyone to create a sense of purpose. We need everyone to build relationships, and we need everyone to help community. And so here are some innovative ways. And I know I'm creating words here, but porching. So over the last 100 years, our front porches have moved to our side of our house and now to our back of our house where it's fenced, and we only invite people we want in there. We need to go back to porching and create spaces in the front of our house and invite all who come by, offer cuppa and talk. Service. You know, what can I do to help others? We are, Jamie shared an article that Jorge, myself, and former Mayor Lisa Helps wrote, and it's about helping others. And one of the things we're seeing is individualism. And again, if you look at porching and going in the back of our house, we're creating individual. And so how can we help others? And you have a neighbor who's struggling to maintain their lawn. What can you do to help? Not pick up the phone and complain and get fines, but how can you actually help that neighbor? How can we start helping each other? And it goes back to Njoki and the mutual aid. One of the things we learned from COVID, I always like to try to find the silver lining of our crises. One of the things we learned from COVID is that community moved faster to help each other and support each other than any program, activity, organization, institution. So service, how can we help each other? But also, how can we get involved in civic life and start contributing to the development and building of our communities? Another one is building belonging spaces. So air conditioning and our inside amenities, TV gaming. I said I was a mother of 3 teenage boys. Well, guess what? I'm fighting this inside space that they've created with gaming and TV, and it's drawn us to be inside and to create individualism. How do we create spaces outside that are interesting, that are fun, that will draw people outside? And when I was in public health, we closed a major road and set up a cafe in the middle of an intersection. Guess what? Everybody came out because that was fun, interesting, and a way of connecting. So how can we do things like that? And the last one is something that's new, and I'm listening to a lot of podcasts and reading research, and it's how do we create good online spaces? So online is here to stay. But how can we create good online spaces? How can we create public spaces that are good? So before technology and these platforms, cities and towns used to be our social platform, right? Meeting our friends and getting out and meeting each other. So how can we build human connections at the center of our online platforms? How can we build parks and bumping places online? How do we share the same sun online? So these are some of the things that are looking forward and we can do. How can we meet in the middle? We have a lot of crises right now, right? How can we come into the middle and meet in the middle and share that sweet spot of creating belonging, creating community, and there's lots of ways. We've developed a conversation guide around belonging. There's the asset-based community development lens that I might be very, very passionate about. Just saying, we have community of practice. Yeah, so those are just some of the things to think about, but it really begins with you and I getting out and our neighbors, and then our neighbors being neighbors with their neighbors, and then our growing and growing and growing and growing out that way.
Thank you, Heather. Really appreciate the piece on civic life.
Yeah.
It's giving me the sense that we need to reignite a new sense of civic life.
Yeah.
As we start building these connections. And Justin, any thoughts on your end in terms of how can people, as part of the institutions, how can they get engaged?
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to say a couple of things. One is, and I know why we do it, and so I'm not saying it, I'm just highlighting. I think one of the things that often happens is that we start to view, especially as we are dealing with things like this or in difficult and challenging places, we start to think of like individuals and institutions, but we or communities and institutions, communities and their municipality, and think of municipalities as providing services down to citizens and the community, rather than as being that our communities are actually the interconnected web that is our municipalities or institutions and our individuals. And each of those institutions, whether they be the service providers or the municipality or that, are ultimately made up of individuals. And so I think the more that we can break that down and see ourselves when we're in our institutions, when we're in the roles that we play as both, fulfilling important social roles, but also recognizing that the people that we're interacting with and working with are also, other human beings who are members of our communities, I think is important. When it comes to that institutional side of things, though, I think that what we can recognize is that, as I sort of started out in my conversation, that we know that sense of social connection and belonging are not felt equally throughout our communities. And so part of the reason why that happens is because of institutions, right? And part of the ways that we can address those is through our institutions. And so being mindful and thoughtful about who with doing the research and the work with community to determine where are the gaps within connection and social belonging, and then working through co-ownership to think about how to address those, I think is really a key and important piece that from an institutional lens could be brought together. And I think part of that is being brave around that sense of ownership and co-ownership and what true engagement means across community to develop strategies. Across the work that Tamarack's done throughout our history, we've seen when there is that strong sense of co-ownership, more sustainability in the strategies, greater level of impact that can occur, those kind of things. So that bravery is usually rewarded, and I would stress it. And then the other piece is where you can, as the individual within your institutions, champion the work, right? This work happens because folks champion it. And then the last thing that I'll sort of really, I guess I'll say two more things. One is share stories of success. Right now, we're in a place where the world needs stories of success. We need not hope is great. And hope and optimism is core to the things that we do at Tamarack, but our hope and optimism is built upon the fact that we've seen success. We know that when this work happens, good things happen and there is successes. So we need to tell those stories of success, because part of why people are disconnecting and going in is that they don't feel that sense of hope. So we can all do that. We can find the things that have worked well within the work that we've done and tell those stories. The last thing I'm going to say, and it comes into the question, one of the Q&A questions that I will type an answer to the actual question, but right now there is going to be, from an institutional piece, because the world is going to be hard and budgets are going to be tight, a pulling back on resources. And there's going to need to be the making the case and and I don't love this language, but it is what it is, the return on investment for why this work is so important. From both a financial and economics, it's there, it makes sense, but also from a community lens for why that's important. And people involved with institutions, I think, can help to make that case. And then tied into that is, as important resources lose some of the support that they currently have that are so desperately needed, we need to, throughout our institutions and throughout the work that we do, recognize where that support, where other institutions are going to be impacted, and how we can mutually reinforce and support each other so that that good work doesn't stop. Sorry, that was long-winded, but hopefully helpful.
That was very helpful. Thank you, Justin. That language and return on investment is going to be resonating more and more for sure. And I also want to highlight the comment that you shared on social connection and belonging not being felt equally. This is really important because the work that we're doing on building belonging at the Tamarack Institute has to center equity. Given the current political landscape, there's sometimes the narrative around belonging replacing equity, diversity, and inclusion. That's very disconnected from the work that we're doing. Equity is at the heart of the work we're doing in belonging. When you're doing work on belonging, by default, you have to embed equity. And as an institution, one question you can ask yourself is, how are you contributing to address those power imbalances, as Justin mentioned? As an individual, how are you contributing to address any inequities, any stereotypes, any stigmatization that is happening in your community through the work that you're doing on belonging? Belonging cannot be separated from equity, and I want to highlight this point because this is why we use the word belonging and not the word integration, and not the word inclusion, because unfortunately it's not going far enough. Belonging is about making an individual feel known, noticed, and missed in community, and it requires understanding the power imbalances that are existing in our systems. So in terms of what's next for 2025, well, we have a couple of exciting opportunities for you to engage as part of this work. And I'd like to share my screen to share this just last portion of information here. You might have seen that we launched a Strategy for Belonging working group. We will be having 4 conversations throughout the year, and they are looking at leadership. What kind of leadership do we need in order to build a movement for belonging that is, again, centering equity? And what does leadership look like during these volatile times? We're also looking at the policy level. What are the policies that can build that social infrastructure that can nurture connections? What are the spaces that can build belonging, that can foster cohesion in society? And we're also going to be looking at the future directions of this movement. What would it look like for 2026 and beyond? To continue shaping the call for a strategy for belonging. But right now, we want to start by looking at individuals, places, and policies, and the mechanisms that need to be in place to strengthen belonging. So the first session is going to happen in April. I hope you can join us. More information can be found on the website of the Strategy for Belonging. There's a new section called Strategy for Belonging Working Group. And just a reminder that these sessions are really meant for you to participate as an active contributor to the movement. We're there to listen, to help host the conversation, but it's really your opportunity to help us shape this movement. We're also going to be having conversations with local leaders, conversations with municipal staff, to understand these different perspectives that come from different levels of society in shaping the call for a strategy for belonging. And we're going to be launching 3 webinar series on belonging. The first one is going to be looking at public health, recognizing the magnitude of this crisis and the impact on mental health outcomes. The second one is looking at the connection between belonging and climate action, recognizing that we're also facing a climate crisis, and it's the climate crisis impacts those that are most vulnerable to climate disasters. And we're also going to be having a webinar series on poverty and belonging, just again recognizing that data has shown that individuals from low income families tend to be more vulnerable to loneliness and isolation. So we hope you can join us for these conversations. The webinar series will be announced soon in the next couple of weeks, at least the first one on public health, but the information on the Strategy for Belonging working group should be available online right now. Jamie, do we have any questions?
So we had one question that came up in the Q&A box, and it was specifically for Justin. Justin has been typing an answer, but Justin, do you want to address it to the group?
So I'll try my best to answer, and then I'll also reach out to them separately. And I think the first it is when it comes to the work that we do, specifically in the belonging sphere, Tamarack does support mostly with capacity building pieces and sort of like networking. There's a whole slew of things for community collaboration projects through the communities building belonging work. So Jorge's team there, as well as the Circle for Actions. I think that those applications are sort of through. The funding from Tamarack to communities, though, is quite sort of like limited. It's more around the actual capacity building, the network, the joining up, that kind of piece of it. The extra piece that I was going to send in my follow-up note, though, is that when I was talking about in my last answer, that good work right now is going to like need to be justified because of the like that instinct towards like austerity is going to be strong, and we need to be making cases against it, and in for good programs that we know are there. Like I've been watching the changes to the funding for, I'm assuming from this question, the local immigration partnerships and what that's going to mean. And so I was going to offer to have a conversation in ways that like Tamarack might, as a part of our overall public policy and government relations pieces, be helpful, because so much important and good work around belonging for newcomers and other equity deserving communities in Canada is going to be impacted by this. So yeah, I was just going to say, but I'll follow up with Sanella about that.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. Looking at what came up in the chat, I'm seeing commentary about how important libraries are as spaces for resources, bridging socioeconomic divides, civic renewal, and building trust. We love hearing about those built environments that give a space to this really important work. Amanda mentioned about the 541 Cafe in Hamilton, and that there are individual donors who care about these priorities, which can help the larger, I think, supplement when larger institutions might be withholding support. Yeah, we're just seeing a lot of sharing of books. It's really, really awesome to see the number of reading resources that have come out. We'll be sharing all of those in the follow-up. I'm seeing a question or a commentary from Sharon, specifically about the value of equity in this work. Sharon wrote, unfortunately, as funding becomes more challenging in the nonprofit sector, it is also difficult to maintain a sense of hope from moving forward at the community level. And they're just talking about how essential hope is for this work. And I'm curious, Jorge, as we talk about like burnout physically, mentally, spiritually, with a few different sociopolitical factors. What are you hearing from folks on the ground who are facing this?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Sharon, thank you for your comment. It's very true. Funding is an issue. I mean, I just showed a graph in which we're showing the representation of sectors. We only have 3% being represented by funders. And as I share, like most of the people who have supported the pledge are actually local foundations. So there's only so much they can do, right? That being said, this is why we're working with Heather as part of this movement. Heather has been stewarding the asset-based community development area of practice within the Tamarack Institute. ABCD is about working on strengths, working on gifts, the assets that we have in community. And I completely understand that we're all experiencing very difficult times right now. I mean, Justin just reminded us that we need to be very clear on the language we're using to show that this work is actually worth investing in. So that being said, working from a mindset of strengths and gifts can really be game changer. I'm really not exaggerating when I'm telling you that for at least in the context on our belonging work, this is what has made it work. That we work with communities from a place of gifts. What is it that you have already that can help you do your work better? You're not adding something else to your work. You were just integrating ways to collaborate that are more effective for you and that help you alleviate that stress, that tension from whether it's a lack of capacity, a lack of time, you name it. We use asset-based community development as a way for us to collaborate. It's not only in the context of burnout, but I have been reflecting on the context of polarization and division that we're going through. And I would say that asset-based community development as a model has helped us um, um, develop collaboration opportunities, collaboration engagements that are grounded in strengths. So rather than having strong arguments, division within our collaboration work, we're seeing that communities are able to come together, individuals from many different sectors, because we're using an asset-based lens. Heather, how does that resonate with you?
First of all, I'm just like, my heart is growing because I just love people talking about asset-based community development. This actually brings, I was actually focusing on a different comment from Celine about power.
Yeah.
And power over marginalized groups, but this actually all comes into the same conversation in that asset-based community development is we're moving it's starting with the individual. So no matter who or what or where you are, everybody has something to contribute to our community, which then helps in terms of power dynamics. I've been really focusing on power and asset-based community development, and one of the things I ask organizations and groups is, what was your reason, or how was the community involved in the decisions of the program? Usually they're recipients, meaning that they are just to receive this program, or they're information sources, which means they have less or lower power. It's okay. There are reasons why you don't want people vaccinating each other. So you can't, they need to be recipients, right? Unless they have the skills, the training, and all of that. But when all of our programs are started or treated as recipients, our community, then there's a problem. So we need to actually look at our programs and services. And when you go up the ladder, it's recipients, information source, advisors, and in control. I like that explanation of the ladder. There's one that's really detailed, but I like that because it helps us to see who is in control of that program or activity. So that's something, an exercise you can do, and I'll make sure that that gets sent out. But the other thing is, in terms of burnout, getting asset-based community development really helps people understand passion. Passion drives action. So when we go into community and we learn what people are passionate about, I am passionate about children and youth. And if you know that about me, and we've got something we want to do with youth, or we I hate this word, but we've got a problem with youth. I am the one who will step up because that's my passion. When we don't understand people's passions and we step up and we're not really passionate about it, we take on so much, that's when burnout gets to us. So understanding what we have in our community, understanding passion and what drives us and what drives in the community. Because one of the things I'm telling you is burnout from a professional standpoint is going into a community, working so hard and seeing no change. That leads to burnout. And that is because I do not know the community I'm stepping into. And I'm forcing them to do something that is not their passion. It is not where they're at. And so that whole listening to community and understanding where your program, your organization fits into that community, not how the community should fit into you and your mandate. A lot of this is a mental shift from our traditional ways of working. And, I've been saying this to Jorge and Njoki, old ways will not open new doors. So we are at a time right now where let's try this. Let's try new ways. Let's see community as the power to solution, not community as recipients of the solution. That was a lot, sorry.
Thanks so much, Heather. I'm also conscious of the comments that have been shared through the chat, and thank you. We won't have enough time to go through all of them. Just before we go, we have some announcements here, some final announcements. So first of all is that we have our 2 communities of practice that are coming, sessions that are coming soon. So we have the Neighborhood Learning Community of Practice and the Community Safety Community of Practice. These are spaces for us to get into these individual conversations on how belonging is showing up in the context of building neighborhood connections, but also in the context of strengthening our sense of holistic sense of community safety. So we have 1 session coming up at the end of March on creating cultures of belonging through brave leadership. Again, leadership is a theme that we will be exploring deeply this year. And the second one is on community safety more broadly, some reflections from the Canadian Center for Safer Communities. So we hope you can join us. Again, the one on neighborhood learning is happening on March 25th, and the one on community safety is happening on April 30th. Just to Heather's point, there's also the guide that she developed this last year on how to host community conversations, which is really helpful in the context of building belonging. And that's it for today. So we hope we can keep in touch. We'd love to hear from you. I have taken note of the comments that are also in the chat box so that we can reflect on them. And thank you for being here with us today.